Reagan Weaver. Was president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Student Organization, but those not majoring in logistics or supply chain, like a lot of these businesses, they have all types of degrees that we're looking for. We go on a lot of tours, have a lot of events. Check us out if you're familiar with WorkSync online. Take a look at it. I think it's definitely worth your time.
Can I pitch my student organization as well?
Is it supply chain management or logistics? What is it?
It's AAA.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's the aviation one, you bet.
Hello, my name is Sadiq. I'm currently the treasurer of my student organization, AAE, American Association of Airport Executives.
I'll switch over.
Okay. I actually can.
Please join
I
us.
actually will be able to advance
Our first
right here.
Our
Yeah.
first official meeting is at the September 12th at the BLB 010. And we have, as same as Reagan said, we have tours, we have events that will be coming up for the semester, and I'm pretty excited and what for this year and this semester as well. So if you have any interest in aviation, or even could be flying, please give it a chance.
Thank you. Are you ready now?
I think I'm ready.
Okay, so one of our alums, right?
Hey, I got it.
Nathan
I'm good.
Chaney, who stands beside, or was beside me. One of
Oh,
our
okay,
alums of our
gotcha. Okay,
program.
all right.
And one of the reasons why I wanted him to come in and be the first speaker to kind of kick off this semester and this year was that he went from I graduated, I got a job, to saying, you know what, there seems to be a community out there in almost like the virtual space, right? The social community, the LinkedIn community, just out there that needs to kind of grapple around supply chain and not necessarily around the micro influencers that make millions of dollars doing the stupidest things. Let's do some professional things and make some influence. And so he's ventured off and moving real fast, I have to tell you, on really getting out there with podcasts and LinkedIn and various aspects of bringing supply chain to the forefront of what we see in social media and what we see online and that kind of stuff. And so what was really cool is he's done a lot of podcasts, and I said, man, there's so many nuggets of knowledge in all those people that you're talking to, all those executives. And so he's like, hey, I can mine those nuggets and then bring them as sharing points. And so that's kind of what he's going to come here and do. And so take a listen. I encourage you as well, even after the fact, 'cause I'm sure he'll give you some kind of way to do it. Link in with him. Like, figure out what he's got going on online, get on his podcast, listen to him. He's pretty active with it. And he even puts out I don't know if you're going to talk about it, he even puts out a weekly every Monday.
Yeah, every Monday. Yeah.
Monday, what's going on in supply chain in the DFW area. And so it's pretty cool because if you want to know what's happening, there's things I listen to it because I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. And so I go to Nathan Chaney's little cast on Mondays to find out what's happening in the DFW area for the week. So with no further ado, because we don't want to run out of time.
No, we're good.
We're good.
So you said 12:50?
12:50,
exactly when
this class is officially over.
is when-
There'll be people knocking on the door.
Yeah.
So-
The marketing people or accounting or
Marketing, we're gonna kick them out of here.
someone.
We'll lock the door.
All right. Well, before we do this, I just like influencers sort of thinking, right? So, okay, now that's done. All right. So, hey there, my name is Nathan Chaney. I was sitting in your seat some time ago, study logistics and supply chain management here at UNT. Have not left the DFW area since then, but I have been playing in all of the different sandboxes of supply chain, either like transportation or high tech or manufacturing or distribution, 3PL, a little bit of everything, to the point that I felt I almost had the credentials to be able to call myself supply chainy. It's a pretty big task. Those of you studying supply chain, right? There's so many elements to it. And one of the most recent things I've kind of taken on is this podcast, which is an effort to kind of share the voices and experience and expertise of a lot of people from all around the supply chain. And so what we're going to do today is go through the top 10 episodes of that, like 3-minute little summary of each one. to give you all like a quick little hit of a different area of supply chain from a different perspective, with the hope that if one of these catches your eye and you're still thinking about exactly what you want to do when you grow up, that one of these things will be like, oh, I want to be the commercial real estate guy, or I want to like go sell high tech stuff or whatever. So maybe help you out with some career decisions, and you can go listen to the full length podcast at that point, right? Another thing I would ask is that if you've got questions, please feel free to chunk them out like while this is going on. It would help me to not feel like I'm just up here talking for forever. So please be engaging as much as you want to be. And I may ever now and then ask for some participation from you all as well. But either way, thanks Dr. Sauser and to UNT for inviting me to come up. My goal out of this is for you to get something out of it, right? So make sure that you walk out of here today with something beneficial from this, other than the points that you need for this class or whatever that is, right? Something else has got to hit from this. All right. So a quick little rundown about Supply Chaney in general, other than it being my last name and a play on words and stuff. Started actually as of like 2 days from now. I'll be in business for 2 years, which is kind of remarkable. So thank you, sir. So I did kind of start this out and just kind of have been adding to the what I would call the lasagna of the supply chain sort of ecosystem I'm trying to build. Started out with just consulting. So I left my last day job, salary sort of job 2 years ago, and started out just doing sort of retainer type consulting work for 3PLs, manufacturers, all around the supply chain space. While I was doing that, I was helping out a friend that had a freight brokerage, which we're going to hear from him here, and started kind of knocking on doors and helping to build his business, and got some leads that said, I would like to do business directly with you, Nathan, not another business. So I went and started the freight brokerage business. Then kind of around, I've been in this sort of industry for a while. I was the president of CSCMP here in DFW, and I'm pretty engaged with all the networking groups. And I realized they've all got different calendars of events, and there's no central location to go see what all of them are doing in any one place. So that kind of like was the creation of the events calendar. From there, I started the YouTube channel just because I thought it was cool and I like video. And so the YouTube channel is basically a mashup between MTV Cribs and how it's made, as far as like our Supply Chaney on tour episodes. And then I provide a lot of coverage for events and conferences and meetings and all that sort of stuff, and give like highlights and kind of interview people and all that sort of stuff. That led into podcasting, because podcasting is actually much easier than YouTube. Typically, you have a podcaster who's just dealing with audio, and then they kind of get a feel for it and they move up to video, which is much more difficult and costly to edit and produce. I went backwards. So then added on the podcast piece, started doing some marketing stuff. So I actually don't mind if the marketing people come in after us. I'm currently working on my MBA here at UNT as well. And I'm actually in marketing 5200 right now, consumer behavior. So, and then lastly, the most recent sort of addition to this, to the lasagna here, is the Supply Chain Social Club, which is essentially all those networking events that I'm kind of promoting on the calendar, just brought into virtual reality so that you can do it from here in Denton without having to drive to a brewery in Fort Worth to meet supply chain professionals, right? We'll talk a little bit about that later as well. So that's a quick overview of Supply Chaney. So then let's kind of maybe drill into that podcast piece. So like any good logistician, or I think business person in general, I created a 2x2 matrix. I called it a bingo card for the layman out there, but a matrix of how am I going to go make sure that I uncover all the voices out in the supply chain world. So if you look across the top, what you'll see is plan, source, make, store, and deliver as kind of the 5 main buckets of what goes on in a supply chain. And then if you look down the left column, you'll see there's a people component, an operations component, marketing, finance, tech, data, information piece. And then underneath all that is all the other stakeholders that participate in the supply chain ecosystem, media, industry, government, academia, and then ESG, kind of social governance type of entities. So what we're going to do today is take a little trip through the bingo card here. I know I said top 10, but today you buy 10, get 1 free. So we're going to do 1 11th one, which is just going to be a quick hit of those stakeholders. So we kind of make sure that we do a really like well-rounded run through the whole supply chain today. The QR code here will take you to my YouTube page. Would totally love the subscription and all that sort of good stuff. But you'll find the podcast there as well as the other sort of episodes of things I do. So before I get started, I would love to hear from you all if you all have any podcasts that you listen to from a professional perspective. My non-professional perspective favorite one is How I Built This, because I like to hear about how other entrepreneurs built their businesses. Is there any from you all, like your favorite? Do you all listen to any podcasts?
I listen to Supply Chain Now.
Supply Chain Now? Yeah.
I listen to, you have a podcast, right?
I used to, yeah.
I listened to a few episodes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Very nice. I didn't know about this, Reagan. Anyone else? Podcast going once, going twice. Okay. How about a not professional podcast? Any favorites? No? Okay.
I listened to one that's pretty cool.
Okay.
I don't know what it's called, but this guy, like, they bought like a cruise and then came back with the cruise and then sold it because they realized it was a lot of experience. I don't really know, but it was,
Okay.
I listened to like fun, cool ones.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Y'all spend enough time reading books and learning things. You'll probably get a hall pass for not also doing that in your free time. For me, I kind of just nerd out, obviously, on everything supply chain. So I kind of eat, sleep, and breathe it. All right. So let's move along. Before I get going, any questions, anything top of mind you want to like kind of get out before you forget? No. Okay. Let's do it. All right. So we're going to start with what you see right there, direct recruiters. So that's going to be recruiting. So I want to start with the people component, because I think people are kind of the most important thing of what happens in supply chains, right? Then we're going to go into planning, sourcing. We're going to take a jump down into Exos trucks, and we're going to talk a little bit about the manufacturing piece. Even though I have him under the deliver section, they actually manufacture electric trucks, so that does kind of fit in the make component. Freight Smith does dock and yard management. Run over to Landstar, which is transportation. Down to Omnitrax, which is a short line railroad operator. Over to CBRE, which is commercial real estate, warehouses and commercial buildings. Heinrich Law, which is a transportation law firm. Over to Conversite, which is an AI company that you can basically ask your system, how many widgets do I have in Seattle right now that are older than 90 days? And it'll say, this is how many you have, without you actually having to go put in an actual question. And then the last bonus episode, we've got Agile Business Media and Events, which produces magazines and episodes of shows and all that sort of good stuff. CSEMP, which is an industry organization that I'm pretty fond of. And then lastly, the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. So that's the roadmap.
Which one were you most excited about?
Oh, that's a tough one. Let me answer that later. Let me see. I gotta think on that one. You don't be asking such hard questions right at the beginning. All right, so let's talk a little bit first about supply chain career strategies with Tom Clark. So he is at Direct Recruiters. He's also president of the CSEMP Roundtable in Cleveland. He's an Army veteran, and that's where he got a little bit of his logistics and sort of operations mindset. Worked in healthcare logistics, worked a little bit like for Staples, ran some of their DCs here in the US, and kind of moved over into that recruiting, talent development, supply chain component of the world. And now his main focus is on recruiting executives into supply chain roles. And what I learned from this episode mostly is that whenever you start talking about chief supply chain officers of companies and VP of supply chain and logistics at really major global companies, it's your standard HR partner or recruiter within a company does not really have that super high level supply chain expertise to be able to actually go vet and go find where that best candidate is. Because sometimes that best candidate to be the new head of supply chain for Yeti or what, pick a name, right? They might be working at Toyota, right? Or they might be working at somewhere else and not necessarily telling everyone I'm looking for a new job, right? I've been here for a while, looking for something different. But these professional recruiters, they have had all those conversations. They kind of like know all the who's who in the industry. And so what they provide basically, right, is to companies is expertise in understanding the supply chain concepts and understanding who is really good at being able to do whatever that company needs. And I have here, you'll see that a resume is like a proof of performance, right? Which is essentially the way he puts it in the podcast is that a resume tells an employer, I can feel good about hiring this person because they have a track record of having done this already. And that's kind of like their insurance policy, right? They're like, okay, we can see that this person has a demonstrated history of being able to open up warehouses across a foreign country, right? And we need to go do that for our supply chain. This is the person to hire, right? So that's kind of what that supply chain, what that resume does. And obviously, as you're just beginning your career, it's a slightly different story, but you can still leverage some of those concepts to put yourself in a position to say, I've been able to do X, Y, and Z, and that's how I'm going to be able to help you with what you need me to do, Mr. Employer or Mrs. Employer. Yes.
In recent times, since AI has been used in hiring processes,
Yeah.
there's the type of software to scan on resumes, and then it'll go to the HR person. How would you able to make sure you get past the AI and the HR?
He actually talks about that in the episode. So I would encourage you to just go listen to the whole episode. But the short version of that is AI is mostly used when a recruiter has a stack, I'm going to say stack, it's going to be digital, right? A stack of 1,000 digital resumes and needs to be able to like go through 90% of that like this and just kind of figure out who are the top 25, right? And then from that top 25, they'll spend maybe 30 seconds looking at the top 25 and get it down to the top 5. Those top 5 people are the people that are going to get called in or called up for a Zoom interview or maybe in person. And so he actually breaks that down pretty well in the episode. Yes.
So at what point in your career would you say is the best time to start applying for these higher level positions?
At what point in your career?
Like how much experience do you need to think I can actually get the position?
You'll start to know that as you start moving up that corporate ladder. The kind of people that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis and the kind of conversations you're having, when you start talking about buying assets, or expanding globally or that, when you start having those conversations, you'll kind of know you're at that place. Yeah. And like I mentioned, the main thing kind of from his perspective is companies need to hedge their risk and make sure they don't hire someone that's not going to come in day one and take care of what they're looking for. So they're going to typically hire the most qualified person, right? Even maybe overqualified just a bit for what they need, because then that's going to give them that margin of safety. The big sort of image from this particular podcast episode. So some of these episodes we made some like art for it, and so the big takeaway here was he was just saying, if you want to be a really successful supply chain person, you need to be able to see the big picture and account for the people, the accounting, the marketing, the production, all parts of a company if you're going to be a great supply chain professional. All right, moving along. So next one here, actually this one is not live yet, and that's because Ernst & Young is actually still technically going through the process of approving it. And so there are some companies that obviously want to make sure that they vet and they kind of go through all the content and statements and make sure everything's good. So this, I'm not giving away any secrets or something here. So this will be coming out sometime soon. So Anant I met him when he was an independent consultant on his own. And then in the last year or two, he got a role at Ernst & Young, but he spent most of his career in consulting. He graduated, though, with a degree in industrial engineering, has a PhD, actually, from Scotland, and he has a very Scottish accent, which is fun in the episode. And so he kind of talks about his transition from industrial engineering, and his professor, his sponsor for his PhD, in the 90s was studying neural networks, which we kind of know today to be kind of the early part of machine learning and AI. So he was basically working on AI and all that sort of stuff in the 90s. And so that was kind of cool to get his perspective on that. But the main sort of bit of that episode is he was just really helping to start the whole concept of talking about planning, which is really the first step in supply chains. Planning has a component of understanding what is your end demand going to be. So how many Samsung little flip phones do we think will be sold in Asia or globally first, right? How many are going to be sold globally 5 years from now? And now let's back up and figure out how much production capacity do we need to be able to make 10 billion of these phones. Where are we going to build them? What kind of processes? Who are the different suppliers we're going to use to make what sub-assemblies to go into building that? And then you got to think about the outbound. So that would be your your demand planning, right? What your demand is coming in. And then you got to plan on your supply side and work with all your vendors and suppliers to have an adequate amount of raw materials to go into that process. And car companies, just saying, I don't know if I'm going to get through everything if I get too many more questions, sorry. And so car companies like General Motors or Toyota, whatnot, they do this sort of planning like 5 to 10 years out. They're like, do I want to be the market leader in electric vehicles 10 years from now? If so, what are the competencies and things that we need today to be able to do this 10 years from now, right? And then that's like your most strategic high-level planning. And then it just kind of distills down all the way down to, okay, what do we need to do in the next 3 years to get to that point 10 years from now? What do we need to do this year? What do we got to do this quarter in order to keep on our roadmap to get to where we want to be 10 years? So that's that's supply chain planning. And for me, I'm very operations. I'm kind of like the end of that plan. I'm the people that kind of like move stuff around or put it in warehouses and put it in boxes and ship it. That upstream component has been a little bit of a gray space or like a fuzzy space for me. So it was really cool to be able to talk with him and learn about that planning piece. And afterwards, I thought it was way more interesting. I was like, man, maybe I made the wrong turn at the supply chain world. Maybe I should have turned down the planning piece because it's actually pretty cool. Okay, next sort of stop along the supply chain journey is that second column there on my bingo card, which is sourcing and procurement. So Li Hong Wu is currently an independent consultant. And what you'll find through some of these, most of my podcasts is you're going to have folks that have had industry experience, have kind of moved through different organizations. And then at some point, it seems like most people step off that corporate bus and become independent consultants and maybe do that for a little while. Maybe they'll stay on that track the rest of their career, or they'll hop back into another corporate role. So some of the folks that I'm talking with happen to be between those sort of corporate roles and on their own. Some of them are in the corporate roles at the time, right? So Li Hong Wu, though, he really gives some great examples. He worked for a particular company that was doing all their manufacturing in Europe. And he kind of came into that sourcing and procurement organization and came into a leadership role of it when the company as a whole, the planners up top, decided they wanted to move their manufacturing from Europe to Asia. Given that, I think Li Hong, he speaks Chinese, so that he was kind of in a good position to be able to go to Asia and go help set up the supply chain and the supply base and all the sort of supply chain that needed to happen to allow them to move all of the production for this company from Europe to Asia. And we talk in there a little bit, like for you guys, you probably have this concept, like whenever you're ending a relationship with someone, that's you kind of just let things go, right? You're like, this isn't gonna cut off clean. Like we're gonna be like, hating on each other, and we're gonna make life difficult because we know this relationship is ending. So the fun thing about this is that whenever they told those manufacturers in Europe that they're pulling all their business away, right? We talk a little about how, as a procurement person and a sourcing person, you've got to really work with those suppliers to make sure they provide you 100% great product all the way to the very last one coming off their assembly line, right? Because now you could hurt your quality of your product that you're putting out into the market. So that was pretty cool. The other thing he mentioned here is that globalization, and he kind of rode that globalization wave, right? Like particularly for the company where he helped to migrate the production from Europe. It was a European company. And globalization basically kind of told them, hey, we could go build our widgets cheaper in Asia. And so he was part of that wave, and the pendulum now, as many of you may know, is swinging back the other way, and that concept of globalization is kind of becoming a little bit smaller. And we're kind of talking about nearshoring, reducing risk in variances in our supply chain and keeping things a little bit closer to home so that we're not subject to typhoons and earthquakes and political upheaval and geopolitical problems around the world. So moving on. So if we talked a little bit right there about sourcing and procurement, the next sort of part of this is really putting all the pieces together and building out an actual supply chain division or department. And that was a lot of what Paul talked about. He's currently at Exos Trucks, and he's the VP of supply chain there. Exos Trucks is making Your FedEx trucks, your brown box UPS trucks, they're making those, but the electric versions of them. And so he spent a good 20 years at Caterpillar, the big yellow construction equipment there. And he was in charge of a lot of their global supply chain sort of initiatives. And so he did that for a good while, went independent, was working as a consultant for a lot of Caterpillar suppliers, which he was previously working with, right? On the Caterpillar side, he went to go work directly for them. And then he kind of started having a couple roles back in the corporate world. And again, so he's back at Exos. The thing that he kind of talked about is that he started to brand himself as that person that can step into a chaotic startup environment that has a supply chain. If you're a startup company and you're making electric trucks, your first goal is just to make one that works, right? And you got your engineer guys, you got your people in the ground floor just trying to get that one pilot vehicle, that one prototype to go. But whenever you start maturing that organization, you guys start thinking about how do we duplicate this really rough, dirty process that we just went through to make one and be able to make 1,000 a month or 1,000 a week or 1,000 a day, right? And that's where that really high level planning and expertise comes in to be able to move a company from their first baby steps to actually acting like a big company. So that's a lot about what he talked about. The cool thing I took away from that conversation is the term ikigai. Had anyone heard of ikigai before? Yeah, sweet. So you can't really see it here. You can Google it and look it up later. But basically, ikigai is a Japanese term which basically states that you are kind of finding your life's mission and you're kind of doing what's right and what kind of comes naturally and best for you. If you can find what you love, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and what you're good at. And so if you can find the sweet spot of all of those concepts, then you're probably going to be setting yourself up for success because you love what you're doing, you can make money at it, the world needs it, and you're able to kind of just keep that going because all those are all in sync. And honestly, whenever he told me that, it really made my day. It might have made my week because what it told me is that I think I've finally found that for myself, right? With Supply Chaney and all that I'm doing there is trying to just create this supply chain sort of resource for all of you and for industry and for other organizations. And I think that is my ikigai, which is crazy. And so I was so fortunate to be able to have that conversation with him and him to kind of relay that. And those are the kind of nuggets of wisdom that you get through your learning, through reading books, through having lectures from professors and from listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos. Yeah, really good stuff. So we move on to warehouse scheduling. So let's say right there we just started making trucks. Now we've got a warehouse and we got to warehouse them, distribute them. And so Ryan Howard, he's kind of a growth guy. He helps. His career has been largely on taking startup companies, typically that are doing SaaS, which is software as a service, and help them grow legs and grow their business up. And so one of the things is we talked a little bit about dock scheduling. So any of y'all that have been in a warehouse environment, a distribution type center environment, you've got trucks, coming in, you got trucks going out. Some of you may have had the great fortune of driving past big warehouses that have 10 trucks parked out along the road, all waiting for their time to go in and unload. Well, basically, FreightSmith and similar type of software allows those trucks to not have to sit in line outside and wait for their appointment. They can kind of go in like what you would do at a restaurant when you go in, you say, hey, here's my phone number, just text me whenever you're ready for me. That's kind of like what they do, but on a grand scale. The trucker can say, hey, I'm within 10 miles of the facility. Let me know exactly what door and what time you need me here, and I'll be there, and I can hang out. Again, can you save it? Okay. Let me know when you're absolutely ready for me, and I'll hang out at the Love's truck stop, right? Slurping on a Slurpee or something, and then let me know, and then I'll come into the warehouse. So we keep that traffic jam of what's going on outside the warehouse to a minimum. We don't bother the neighbors in the neighborhood because we got trucks all down the street and all that sort of stuff. So it allows the warehouse to be more efficient with their time, and it also allows the truck to be efficient, so they're not sitting around. There's not traffic jams, all that sort of good stuff. So he's also a salesperson. He's also quite good at trade shows, conferences, and that sort of thing. And I spotted him because he gave a presentation about how to go leverage conferences if you're a company. And so I pulled him in to talk a little bit about that. And the main thing I kind of took away from that was this concept of if you go into sales, he kind of pinned it as 6 seconds of awkwardness. When you first meet someone for the first time, you've never met them before, and it's kind of like a cold introduction, and you're like, hey, yeah, my name is Nathan, and I'm trying to sell you some really expensive stuff. Could you spend some time talking to me about it, right? There's a little bit of like a weird awkwardness in that beginning phase, but as soon as you can kind of break through it and kind of break the ice and get the conversation going, then you've got like some dialogue and everything's good. But a lot of times there's a little bit of that awkwardness or that hesitancy to even start the conversation to begin with, right? So we talk a little bit about that sales process in there. All right, I think we're about halfway through maybe right now. So this episode, we're talking about the trucking component. Title of the episode was Best Freight Friends. That's episode number 1, as you can see, because that's my best friend, Curtis, who's actually also a UNT alum as well. He's been in the trucking and transportation industry. He has a Landstar agency. He owned a fleet of trucks himself. Right now, in addition to that, he also started a barbecue restaurant out in New Mexico. He's a pretty good cook. So he's having a little bit of fun with that. So in this particular episode, we talk a little bit about that owning a fleet of trucks component, being a broker, being an agent, and a little bit about how in logistics and in transportation, and for those of you that are already possibly in the industry, you kind of know, you probably can sympathize with the main quote here, which is that we are like firefighters because we're always putting out fires, not just in transportation, but in logistics and in supply chain. You don't really have a job if there's not problems. If everything went smoothly, there'd be less demand for us, right? It's the fact that things seem to get messed up and you have problems that you always got to solve. That's really what allows us to have a profession to some degree, right? If this was easy, they could really automate everything that we're kind of learning here today. But we'll talk about that in 1 or 2 slides from now, is with the progress of AI and the concept that everyone's really concerned that AI is going to come take our jobs, whether you're a planning and procurement or you're in your manufacturing. But what Ganesh, and we'll talk about it in a second, what he says is basically AI provides you all the information and the data, and it might make some suggestions to you, just like your ChatGPT, whenever you're trying to ask it to write you a cover letter for a resume and an application. It's going to give you some stuff, but at the end of the day, it's up to you to read through it and make sure that the data that it kind of proposed to you was actually accurate. And in the world of supply chain, if you say, hey, AI, tell me how many trucks I need to order next quarter to meet our demand the quarter after that, and it says 100, and you, the supply chain professional, don't vet that. You don't go do some digging and make sure that information was right. You just might have made like a multi-million-dollar mistake, right? So yes, it can help you out, but it's really going to be on the supply chain professionals to, at the end of the day, own the actions that come from those suggestions. I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself there. All right, railroads and real estate. So with Ashley here, got to learn a little bit about the difference between Class 1 railroads and short lines. Short line railroads are kind of like, so if you imagine I-35 and 121, those sort of roads are the Class 1 routes. All the little smaller roads that come off of that are run and operated and owned by short line railroads or regional railroads. And one of those is OmniTracks. And so Ashley, you see I put horses there. She actually studied like animal science at Virginia Tech and was like all about dressage, which we talked about with horses, which I'd never heard about. But if you watch the Olympics, you saw Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart watching the dressage competition at the Olympics. So we talked a little bit about horses, but then quickly transitioned to how she went into agriculture, economic development, and then into commercial and railroad economic development. A little bit of time at BNSF, and then here at OmniTracks. So I think that her story really painted that picture of how we can take our careers in supply chain, and really any career in any industry can move and kind of meander its way to where you finally kind of find that sweet spot. And so one of the fun things we also talked about is I always ask all of the podcast guests, what are some suggestions that you have for students today that are thinking about studying supply chain or are studying supply chain? What are some soft skills, some certifications, some classes that you would suggest? And so we talked about the fact that she had this, her undergrad, again, Virginia Tech, animal sciences, and she went and got an MBA, right? And so she said that MBA allowed her to really understand the world of business and do what she does today. And I think we kind of made a quick little joke that now that there's more logistics and supply chain management degrees out there, that as an industry, we can like stop stealing talent and stuff from other degrees and whatnot, and we can have our own kind of in-house made logistics professionals, right, that study this from day one instead of bringing over English majors and economics majors and that sort of thing, right? So that was kind of a little bit of a fun thing there. All right, so we move over. So we planned it, we made it, we transported it, we put it in a warehouse, and then what's like kind of the big picture here, and that would be, I think we could talk a little about that here with Fred Ragsdale. Most of the folks that you've seen up here, a lot of them are friends of mine and have been in my network for some years. Some of the people I just met a month before I asked them to be on the podcast and got them on. So there's kind of a variety there. But Fred is one of those that I've known for quite a while. And he wanted to be an NFL football player. When that didn't work out, he went into finance for a little bit, worked for some banks, and then found himself in the commercial real estate world. And he's done really well there. And so the main sort of things that we talked about here is problem solving and just being a resource. When you're in sales, there's kind of two kind of salespeople, right? There's the used car salesman or that sort of pesky robot that's trying to sell you something on Facebook or LinkedIn that always keeps pinging you and kind of won't leave you alone. And then there's the long-term strategic built on relationships kind of sales, which are long cycle, right? Like it could take a couple years from the time you meet someone at a networking event, get to know them, see them at some golf tournaments, run into them at some other places, and a couple years later, you've had so many touch points with them and you've established credibility and trust that whenever they're ready to buy a $100 million warehouse, you're the person they go to because they have that trust and they've built it over some time. But that's not something that you can build that type of trust and credibility overnight, over one text message or drinks at one networking event. So what he talks about is you kind of got to be, especially, the bigger things you sell, if you sell airplanes or airports or whatever that is, you've kind of got to be patient and kind of work the process and allow it to work. So Fred is definitely kind of like that professional, high level salesperson in that he's not really there to sell, he's just there to help. And if it's really more like, hey, I need to buy 100 forklifts for my warehouse, Fred, I don't need to buy a warehouse from you or something like that, but I do need 100 forklifts. You bet, I know a forklift guy. I got you taken care of, right? And so just helping out on all those sort of other problems are what, again, help to establish that credibility and trust for people to come back to you when they do need what you're selling or what you represent, what you provide. All right, we're getting close to the end. So for those of you kind of like reading in the news, you probably hear a lot about fraud and theft in transportation. What exactly does that look like? So what it looks like is people driving up to a warehouse and maybe they've scoped out the warehouse days prior and they kind of know that a truck rolls in that has like a XPS on the side, right? And they kind of know what it looks like. They kind of know the process. And so what they do is they go get their truck and their trailer and they go get a big poster board and they write XPS on the side and like duct tape it with clear white masking tape on the side of the truck and kind of arrive at about the time that other carrier normally does, but maybe 10 minutes before, walks in and says, hey, I'm here to pick up, I'm with XPS, I'm here to pick up the load. And the folks in the dock are like, yeah, okay, you're not John, but we'll load you, sure, fine. Load up with the load, they drive off, and that's it, and that cargo is now gone. That's happening quite frequently these days, and there's a lot of sort of iterations on that. But the interesting thing he talks about is that there's a high demand for stealing loads of cheap consumable items because it's easy to get rid of it, right? So he talks about loads of like Listerine, Mentos, and some other little things like that are like the hottest sort of items out there for thieves because they can just go drive around to different grocery stores and sell those things out of the back of their truck pretty quick. Another thing is he tells a story about a warehouse that the truck drove in and like guys in like black track suits and black ski masks rolled in and said, hey, we're here to pick up the load of jet skis. And the guys on the dock were like, what's up with the ski mask, man? This is kind of, it's like it was summertime. And they said, it's COVID. And so they loaded them up with jet skis. That was gone. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cargo disappeared right there, right? And then the first line of this is we kind of joke that he got into law because he didn't want to do math. He was like, little did I realize there's a lot of math actually from what he's doing, because in that example of the loaded jet skis, right? It's kind of a calculation of how much is it going to cost for us to deploy the resources necessary to go track this load of jet skis down. And maybe it wasn't jet skis, maybe it was just a load of Mentos and the whole value of the load was $10,000, right? So it's actually wouldn't be worth hiring on an attorney, talking with the proper sort of authorities in a given state or across multiple states, engaging all this sort of stuff to try to go track down a truckload of $10,000 worth of Mentos, right? So there's these calculations that you kind of got to do to determine whether it makes sense to go pursue and do these sort of things. All right, 2 more left here. AI and supply chain. No real conversation these days could be complete without talking about AI. So Ganesh actually founded Conversite, which I alluded to a while ago. He actually did study mathematics and kind of stayed with that because obviously the backbone of AI, machine learning, neural networks is a lot of coding and mathematics. And so he's really the one that kind of emphasized that whenever AI gives us suggestions or helps us make decisions, it's the human that then typically is making the decision with that data. So actually at the end of the day, it's the human that is smarter than the AI because we're leveraging the resource it's giving us to then make that decision. So he kind of feels good that AI will not take over the world. And he's the one literally building it. Conversite's been around for 7 years. And so they've had a track record of success. They're doing really cool things. So a little bit of AI there. All right, last one, and we're going to be able to have 5 minutes for questions. So at the bottom of that bingo card, you saw the different stakeholders. So the different stakeholders that I've talked to so far, and here sometime soon I'll add UNT onto that academic sort of bubble there. But under the industry component, talked to Mark Baxa. So he was a consultant. Actually, he worked for the people, Monsanto, who does the seeds and agriculture type stuff, ran their global supply chains. Then he went to go be his own consultant and was always part of CSCMP from like the last 20, 30 years. And so recently, in the last couple of years, has moved up into that president and CEO position at CSCMP, which is, an industry networking organization for supply chain professionals. Alan Rudder kind of represented that government piece. Alan was the former administrator for the Federal Railroad Administration. So he was in charge of all the railroads in America when 9/11 happened. And so he, in the podcast, talked a little bit about being at a conference in Chicago when 9/11 happened. And from that point to the next 3 years, there was no other conversation, even in the railroad industry, other than how do we protect our railroads and infrastructure from terrorist attacks. And so he kind of gave that story from his perspective. And then lastly, on the very right, we've got media, which is kind of the world that I'm kind of slowly starting to walk in. I'm very operations minded, but media and marketing is kind of a necessary evil in business. And so I wouldn't say that. It's just necessary. It's not evil. And so Gary was one of those consultants, did a lot of consulting for many years, and then kind of just moved into media when he realized that nobody else was covering the supply chain industry from a media perspective. So he was kind of like the first one in. Then lots of other people kind of jumped in, right? But he's kind of been there from the beginning. So that kind of covers the whole enchilada. We've still got 3 or 4 minutes to go, so we're cool. So here's a quick QR code. You can Google these things, but this takes you to my actual calendar of events, which, again, if you can see here, has a lot of things going on. Some of these are conferences going on in Las Vegas or Chicago, but 80% of the things on the calendar are things happening here in DFW. One of those, the one you can see the little picture of, is actually my own startup organization called Supply Chain Social. And that is essentially kind of taking that networking, having drinks at Chili's or whatever that might be for the supply chain industry, and makes it virtual. And it's pretty cool because you can like move around in the environment from table to table and talk to people. Our next event is the 3rd at 8 p.m. and it's going to basically be a career night. So going to have recruiters and hiring managers there, and then students, right? So the whole idea here is just bring people together in a really low effort, low cost sort of way, and that's Supply Chain Social. So that is happening there. And then lastly, I know I already had this quote earlier, and that's a picture of me back when it snowed here one day, long time ago. Is just that, you know, this quote is kind of my life quote, and I would just kind of leave you with it that, you know, if you kind of get outside of your comfort zone, do something that's a little bit beyond what you think you can do, you'll kind of often surprise yourself with what you're capable of doing. And I have the QR code here goes to my full contact list, which has my phone number, email, everything that I have social-wise is all right there. So most people will tell you that I never turn down a phone call conversation or a request to meet or help meeting or connecting with somebody. So I offer that to you all for sure. Yeah. So anywho, that's me. I appreciate the time, and I think we got 2 minutes for questions. Yes.
For the college and career event, is it online or is it in person?
Online. It's virtual. Mm-hmm.
So back on the theft aspect of this question, is it more common for it to be like a physical theft or more like digital fraud?
There's two components to it. There's the physical part. So kind of like in if you think about the evolution of theft in general, it used to be a wagon with horses going down a trail and bandits coming over and like kicking the people out and just taking the load of gold from Wells Fargo or something, right? That used to be very physical, but now because we're so data and information heavy in how we conduct business, that there's often a data component to it as well, where people are calling in and saying, hey, I need to change the carrier on this pickup. The carrier is now going to be XYA company. And they'll be like, okay, sure, we'll look for that. And then here comes the truck that says XYA. Okay, so they got hold of the data somewhere in the background to know what was going on. So yeah. So more and more becomes more of a digital, where actually there's less and less actual physical interaction. Good question. Yes.
Why do you think they're doing it with Listerine and small goods instead of bigger?
Because it's easy to get rid of them. Yeah. Because if you got like a load of Samsung 55-inch TVs, it's just the physical logistics of it, of being like, hey, Reagan, here's a pallet worth of TVs. You just go sell them out of your back of your car. Logistically, it's a little more difficult. And traceable, there's serial numbers, could be RFID tags, all that stuff. Yes.
Aren't they with some of the trailers? Aren't they using tracking so to prevent theft?
That's one idea, yes. Actually, an interesting story he tells about is, so those of you who knows transportation knows that shippers will put a security tag on the back of the doors of a trailer, so a seal, right, to make sure that it doesn't look like it hasn't been broken into. And so what thieves can do now is they will put heavy, high-powered magnets on the back of the truck doors, take the hinge pins out of it and back off the entire door, go into the load, take out like 5 pallets, adjust the bill of lading a little bit and say, oh no, there's only 20 pallets on this load, not 25. Put the doors back on, put the pins back in, let the truck go on its way, and that seal is still intact. So an example of physical theft, there is definitely a physical component. Yeah. Okay, so I'll be outside for anyone who wants to keep chatting.
Yeah. First, thank you. If you didn't check in, because you came in later, check with Ruben over here, or need to check out. One of the two. Ruben's right over here.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Yep. That was fun. All right. Bye, everybody.
Oh, it's okay. But you need to check in. Okay, so just check in.